My name is Larry Waldinger, and I'm the financial agent for the EDA. That means I take care of the boring and tedious paperwork, accounting, bookkeeping, forms, and more forms. But the nice thing about that is if you get interested in helping us out, somebody's already taken care of that nasty business, and you get to do all the rest of the fun stuff. So I have a really important job here. I take care of all the money for our association. It's the Electoral District Association of Saskatoon-Humboldt, also known as the Saskatoon-Humboldt Federal Green Party Association. Also, I'd like to remind you for safety, please be careful. Maybe avoid coming to the front because there's a lot of cords around here running all over the place. So maybe just try to avoid coming to the front. There is going to be a mic back there later for questions, I hope. And right now, I'm going to get to the most important part of my presentation. I'm just going to talk for like 2 or 3 minutes, and that's 75% tax credit. If any of you want to make a donation to our EDA or to the Central Party for the Green Party of Canada, there's a 75% tax credit for your donations. If you're a student and a tax credit doesn't mean anything to you, or low income, then maybe just pitch a little bit into the bucket. We'll be passing that around. And the bucket was out front at the sign-in desk, and there's sign-in papers and a spreadsheet, your preference on how you prefer to sign in. Please do that. We'll get you on an email list, and then we'll have that information in a second source, in addition to your membership form and or your donation form. So that's really powerful leverage. In other words, let me put this in a simple way. If you donate $400, I recommend that as the sweet spot, the best amount to donate. The limit is $1,200. Restrain yourselves. We can only accept $1,200 from one person at a time. But if you donate $400, you get 75% of it back. You get $300 back at the end of the year when you do your taxes. That's powerful leverage, and you don't get that with charities. So this is a pretty special opportunity, really powerful leverage, a chance for you to do a lot of good with bang for the buck. And accountants and bookkeepers and business people like to get bang for the buck. Also, if you become a member of the party, a membership is only $10, so that ends up costing you $250. We are not exclusive. We don't require you to be only a member of the Green Party of Canada. You can be a member of another party, but that's between you and them. For us, we welcome people from any party, hopefully all parties. We believe this is the fastest growing party in the country. And one of the special things about our party is this is the single party in the country that most loudly and most consistently, via Elizabeth May, our leader, advocates for cooperation between the parties for the sole purpose of getting the Conservatives out of office next term, which is really important. And if you want to talk about bang for the buck and value and risk management, we think that's a good way. Why take chances on having another 4 years of the Conservatives in power? Let's work together and get other parties in, and then work on proportional representation afterwards. And there's going to be a follow-up event on the 25th, March Against Monsanto. That is one of the events that our EDA has been helping to promote. We may do more. If you help us, we will help others. We could end up making a donation to the movement, the March Against Monsanto. That's something that we're still debating. And I mentioned the buckets. One last thing I'd like to say is this party, I think more than any other party, our principles and values are most closely in line with First Nations people in Canada. If you read our principles and you read the values and principles of First Nations people, they're very, very similar. And also this is a party that aggressively and proactively promotes gender equality. We often have very balanced gender makeup in our elections and our boards and events. And our board right now, we have 3 women and 2 males on the executive for the EDA. And if you don't know what EDA is, contact me. I can tell you about that. That's about it. I probably went over 3 minutes, but thank you for your patience. and enjoy the show tonight. Percy's here. He's in the audience right now as I speak, and he will be here later. And our Master of Ceremonies is Darren Gall. He'll be here for the rest of the evening. My name's Larry Waldinger. Thanks. I'll be scooting around here for the rest of the evening, too. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
How are we doing? Okay, great. Percy Schmeiser has become an icon, a kind of an elder who has stood up to a very large corporation that most people would have just given up in the very beginning. And in that way, you've inspired a lot of us to feel like we can affect change, we can be the change that we want to be in the world. A lot of our decisions are being made on our behalf by corporate-sponsored entities, governments, universities. And we need to begin that change to reclaim our true capacity as stakeholders in our future. Because we are the generation, this time, that decides what happens in the next era, in a sense. It's clear that the Earth is at a threshold. Companies like Monsanto, I don't think they're inherently evil, but they certainly need to have a close eye kept on them. And that's up to us to do that. If you are a child born after the year 2000, your chances of having early onset juvenile diabetes are 1 in 3. Clearly something is changing in our society, and part of that is the food that we eat. It's not acceptable to have one company dominate the choices that we make about what we eat, what we give our children, and how we utilize our land. We were told that glyphosate, or Roundup, was completely safe and harmless, biodegradable actually. But it turns out that as our science progresses and the internet has spread word, it's clear that Roundup interferes with a lot of enzymatic processes in plants, and it's no surprise that it also interferes with enzymatic processes in people and in the microorganisms that exist in the soil. So it's a great honor to introduce Percy Schmeiser, the winner of the Mahatma Gandhi, what was that again? Sorry, the Benefit to Humanity Award. So this is a man that is celebrated the world over, especially by countries like Germany and India. So we are really honored to have you speak here today with us. So I want to give you a warm welcome, Percy Schmeiser.
It's a great pleasure for my wife and I to be with you here in Saskatoon this evening. But before I start, I would like my wife to stand up and be recognized. As the trailer showed, I don't think I could have done what we've had to do without the support of my wife. So anyway, I'm glad she's with me here this evening. Now, I'm going to give you briefly a background of where I'm coming from this with the whole issue with Monsanto, and there's many issues have arisen, especially the health issue, the environmental issue, the human rights issue, and so on. But I'm going to go back a little bit on the case that we had with Monsanto starting back in 1998. First of all, briefly, I'll give you a little history. 1996, GMOs were introduced in Canada and the United States at exactly the same time. And that was corn, soya, cotton, and especially here in Canada, canola. Now, I think I said them all, cotton. Now, when they were introduced, what were farmers told? They were told increased yields, more nutritious. But I think what caught the farmers' ears the most was less chemicals. And because farmers are using hundreds of tons of chemicals every year in both our countries, US and Canada. And I think that's one of the main things. But there was two other things they said. With GMOs now, we would always have sustainable agriculture, and with GMOs, we'd be able now to feed a hungry world. So that's what farmers were told. 1996. My wife and I were known in our region, east of Saskatoon here, Saskatoon-Humboldt country, as seed developers and seed savers in canola. And after we got married in 1952, we started to do major research to develop new varieties of canola suitable for our climate conditions and our soil conditions. So that's what we were doing. So we were known as seed savers and seed developers in our regions. And by the time we hit the 80s, we had developed certain varieties of canola suitable, especially against some of the diseases we had in canola. So that gives you a brief background of what we were doing. I was also in business. I was mayor. I was an MLA at the time and so on. And my wife did most of the research work. So what happened then? 1998, 2 years after the introduction of GMOs by Monsanto, they laid what they called a patent infringement lawsuit against my wife and myself, where they said we were growing their Monsanto GMO canola without a license from them. And believe me, that was a surprise, because that would be the last thing that we would want in our research and development of new varieties of canola. And we said to Monsanto at that time, if you have contaminated us, you should be liable for the damages that you have done. So we stood up to Monsanto, and patent laws in Canada, like a lot of countries in the world, come under federal jurisdiction. So we had no choice of where the case would be heard or how it would be heard. Federal Court of Canada with one judge. And believe me, later on, how we wished we could have had a judge and jury with some farmers on that knew and understood farming. But that was not to be. So after 2 years of pre-trial, it went to court. And in the pre-trial, Monsanto admitted they had no knowledge or record that we had ever used or obtained their seed. They admitted that. But they said that that it was contaminated with their GMOs, they now own our seeds or plants. And what I'll just briefly now, and a lot of people don't realize what is still out there today as I speak. What the judge ruled was this: number one, it does not matter how a farmer or anyone gets contaminated with GMOs. And he went on how this could happen: cross-pollination, direct seed movement, by birds, by transportation, and so on. And he said if that happens, whether an organic farmer or conventional farmer, or a gardener, an organic farmer, conventional farmer, you no longer own your seeds or plants. You immediately become the owner of Monsanto. So we were just devastated by that statement. He also ruled that the level of contamination does not matter. If it's only 0.5%, 2% of your entire field, you no longer own your seeds or plants. He also ruled that we were not allowed to use our seeds or plants again. In fact, all that we had in our development and our research now is the ownership of Monsanto, and we had to turn over all the seeds, canola seed that we had developed to Monsanto. So basically it was biopiracy that they were able to obtain 50 years of research and development. So when he made that ruling, you can imagine how devastated we were. So we decided to really dig in, and because being seed developers, we knew how we would lose our biodiversity if our seeds and plants, and heirloom seeds and pedigree seeds would all be contaminated. We'd end up with nothing but GMOs. So we decided to go to the Court of Appeal, which we did. And the Court of Appeal allowed us to appeal. Now we had 3 judges. Basically, the 3 judges ruled exactly the same after 2 years of legal battle, although they didn't agree with all of the trial judges' decision. And at that point, it should have been thrown out. So now we had lost twice, Federal Court of Appeal, and it looked pretty bleak for us. And we inquired about the Supreme Court of Canada, and our chances of going to the Supreme Court of Canada, we were told by our lawyer, maybe 11%. So we decided to put everything on the line that we had financially, mortgaged our land, our home, and so on, to pay our lawyer fees and to proceed to try and have the Supreme Court of Canada to hear the case. And after a year of proceedings, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in our favor to hear the case. But it didn't end there before the Supreme Court. Monsanto did everything possible to stop us. They laid 2 other lawsuits that people don't know about. It was hardly ever in the press. The first other lawsuit was for $1 million against us by Monsanto to try and break us financially. So we had to go to court on that. Secondly, then they tried to seize our land. They issued liens and caveats against our land. They tried to seize our house, our farm, and all our farm equipment to try and stop us. So that was another court case. So by the time we went to the Supreme Court of Canada, all those other cases were pending. When it came to the Supreme Court, we were also able to bring other items that did not relate to the patent issue. And I should maybe mention those to you. And I think they're very important because it all pertains to the patents on life or the patents on seed, which basically all life comes from. And I'll just read some 4 or 5, there were many, but 4 or 5, but I always considered the most important. Number 1, can living organisms, seeds, plants, genes, human organs be owned and protected by corporate patents on intellectual property? Number 2, can genetically modified traits invade, become noxious weeds, and then become resistant to weed killers? Now we call them superweeds, and that also already has happened. 3, can farmers' right to grow conventional or organic crops be protected? 4, can farmers keep the ancient right to save their own seeds and use and develop them, trade with the neighbors if they so desire? And the last one, the most important to my wife and myself at that time, was basically, who owns life? Has anyone, any corporation, the right to have a patent that controls the future of life? So those are all the other things that went before the Supreme Court of Canada. This is what the Supreme Court ruled. Basically, my wife and I would have to pay Monsanto no money. By that time, we had spent about $500,000 on our legal bill. But what was not fair, when the Supreme Court ruled that Monsanto has to pay their legal bill of approximately $2 million, my wife and I have to pay our legal bill of around $500,000. And that was not fair because Monsanto laid the lawsuit against us, and they lost. But that, as I said, was not fair. Now, on the issue of the who owns life, the patents on a gene, this is what the Supreme Court ruled, as it was said in the trailer. Monsanto's patent on a gene is valid, and wherever that gene arrives in any higher life form, they own and control that higher life form. And they also said it has to go back to the Parliament of Canada to address this whole issue. First of all, to protect farmers' rights, and in the regards that life should not be patented. That's been before the House or the Parliament for now 7 or 8 years, and nothing has been done on it. So everything remains exactly as the day those judges came down, the Supreme Court judges came down with their decision. So that gives you a brief outline of the court case that we had with Monsanto. Now, we thought that we were through with Monsanto at that time, but lo and behold, 2 years later, we were doing research. We didn't want to give up. My wife at first said, we will never grow canola again with all the trouble we've had. We will not do it. So we decided we would try yellow mustard, because many years ago we were growing yellow mustard for development, and we were going to go back to yellow mustard. And I left 50 acres without a crop on, summer fallow as we call it. And in the fall, before we were going to seed, in the fall, we noticed that there were canola plants growing on the summer fallow. It was along the main road. It was in bunches. It was individual plants, but it was throughout the whole 50 acres. And we were really concerned about that. We did some testing, and we realized we got some of Monsanto's herbicide Roundup, and the plants did not die. And Monsanto had said all through the court cases, if any green thing is sprayed with Monsanto's herbicide Roundup, it's their gene that's in it. So we were quite certain it was Monsanto's gene or Roundup Ready canola. But we did the testing, and after 10 or 12 days of spraying some chemical on it, the plants did not die. So we notified Monsanto and said, we believe that you have contaminated one of our fields for research, and we want you to come out and check. And indeed they did. And they took samples from the 12 plants we had tested, and they took samples from other plants. 2 days later, they notified my wife and myself, yes, indeed, those plants, those canola plants on your field are Monsanto's GMO canola. And they asked my wife, especially my wife at that time, what do you want done with those plants, the contamination on that 50-acre field? And my wife said to them, and I said to them, we want every plant on that 50-acre field pulled out by hand. Monsanto agreed to do this because we did not want any of the seeds to fall from the plant because of the research on yellow mustard, which you cannot separate. And 2 days before they were to come, my wife gets a fax from Monsanto and said it was called a release form. And it was blanked, paragraphs were blanked out. My wife fired back and said, we will not sign a document or a release form unless we can read the complete document. So they eventually sent us a complete document, and this is what it said. My wife or myself or any member of our family could never ever take Monsanto to court again for the rest of our lives, no matter how much they contaminated us in the future. The other release they wanted is that we could never ever talk, in other words, a gag order, about Monsanto again for the rest of our lives. In other words, our freedom of speech would be taken away. So we fired back and said that we will never ever give up our freedom of speech to a corporation, because how many people in our country gave up their lives for freedom of speech, and we will not sign the document. Monsanto fired back and said, if you don't sign the document, we will not remove the contamination. So we fired back to Monsanto and we said, with the help of our neighbors, we will remove the contaminated canola on our field. Then we really got a nasty letter back from Monsanto and said, Mr. and Mrs. Schmeiser, we wish to advise you that those canola plants, those Monsanto's canola plants on your field are not your property. They belong to Monsanto and you can't do with them what you want. Well, that really angered us. And we said to Monsanto, we own the land, we pay the taxes, we are going to do on our land what we want, and we will remove the plants. So with the help of our neighbors, 3 days, we removed all the plants. I don't know how many semi-loads there were. And then I paid my neighbors $640, which was very, very little. It was more as a gift. So my wife and I decided, what are we going to do with this bill of $640? So we decided we'll send a bill to Monsanto, which we did. And Monsanto refused to pay unless we signed the release form. And this went on for about a year. And then we said, well, let's try something else. So we decided to take Monsanto to the small claims court for $640. The judge here in Saskatoon agreed with us, and we had Monsanto in court for a $640 bill, a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So in the end, what happened was Monsanto had to pay for the contamination cleanup. Now, and $640 plus a $20 cost. It was not the issue of the $640, but what it has done is set a precedent. If a farmer is contaminated, an avenue has been set, or a means have been set where a farmer can gain some compensation from a corporation. So that was a major victory, not only for my wife and myself, but for farmers all over the world. I'd like to talk to you, because it's seeding time, a little bit about seeds and plants. First of all, there's two sides to the whole issue of the seed issue. First of all, To genetic alter a seed to be resistant to a chemical, you have to transfer a gene from one life form to another. And a lot of what people don't know, you can never transfer that gene by itself. You have to use what we call a promoter or vector. And what are these promoters or vectors? They are either a bacteria or an agrobacteria, and in the case of canola, it's an antibiotic-resistant marker gene. So when you eat any food that has been a GMO food, and we are eating lots of it now, it has also a virus in it that was never in your food before, or a bacteria. And in the case of canola, anything canola oil, anything like that, it's an antibiotic-resistant marker gene. There's a lot of talk now and a lot of research going on. They feel that a lot of people, and especially in the farming community, are totally immune to certain antibiotics. It was said at first, well, the doctors are prescribing too much antibiotics. It's not that, it's what the pollen that they're breathing in with that antibiotic-resistant marker gene in. The whole other issue with the seeds, the loss of biodiversity that we are losing, plants that we've had, seeds that we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years, we're losing this. And so that's why it's so important that no new GMOs be introduced, whether it's wheat, alfalfa, rice, or you name it. And that's because, first of all, this is what we have found. Number one, there is no such thing as coexistence. It really used to bother me when I first started going to Germany and Austria and Poland and so on, Switzerland, when the companies like Monsanto would say, you can have coexistence. You can have an organic farmer, you can have a conventional farmer, you can have a GMO farmer. That is total impossible. And after a few years, it all becomes GMOs. Where do we really stand with this in Canada? We basically have no pure canola seed left in Canada. If you seed canola now, it's only you can buy is GMO canola. If you seed soybeans, especially in Ontario, southern Manitoba, it's only going to be GMOs. So your choice is gone. Now here's another, so your freedom of choice is taken away. So there is no such thing as coexistence. The other thing is this, there is no such thing as containment. It will spread, it doesn't matter if it's 50 miles away or 100 miles away. You can't control the wind, the birds, the bees, and so on. So there is no such thing as containment. It eventually becomes all GMOs, which has happened to us here now in Canada, especially with canola and soybeans. So no containment, no coexistence. Here's another very important fact. Most plants come from a family of plants. And in the case of canola, it comes from the brassica family. You have radishes, turnips, cauliflower, and so on. And through cross-pollination from GMO canola, it's now getting into those market garden crops, and eventually we will lose organic crops in that and conventional crops in those market garden crops. And already people are telling me when they buy broccoli, their canola plant, and they seed it, canola plants are already coming from that seed. So that shows you how far that has spread into market garden crops. So no containment, no coexistence. What about chemical use? GMOs really never ever meant to feed a hungry and starving world. And if it would have, we have it now for 16 years or 17 years. We have as much starvation in the world, as much hunger in the world as we did in 1996. GMOs were only meant to prevent a plant from dying if you sprayed a chemical on it. And that's what it only meant. So now you have a massive increased use of chemicals, at least 4 to 5 times more chemical use, especially on canola or corn crops if you're in the United States primarily, than you ever had before. And now you have developed a new form of superweeds that take this new powerful chemicals to try and kill it. They have new Roundup Ready, the glyphosate, more powerful, 4 times more powerful now than it was in 1996. But worst of all, we have two 4-Ds to try and kill this new superweed that has been developed by GMOs. And this 2,4-D contains 70% Agent Orange. This is what we're using on the prairies now. And look what happened when they use Agent Orange in Vietnam. And these are the things that are happening, and you wonder what is going on and why is the government permitting it. So those are some of the things that has happened. And also, lower yields now, more chemical use, less nutritious. Broccoli, they say now, is 50% less nutritious than it was before. But testing now has to be done when parents now are feeding their children or their grandchildren, and they feel they're providing nutritious food. It isn't the same as it was 20, 30, or 40 years ago, because when you alter a plant with genes, you damage the mechanism or the structure of the plant and the structure of the plant's ability to take the proper nutrients out of the soil. So those are some of the things that happen with the seed. Two other things, and then like I said, I'd like to concentrate on seed tonight. Monsanto tried something else to get total control of the world's seed supply, and this is what it's all about. Control of the world's seed supply, and then control of the world's food supply. Monsanto was primarily known as a chemical company right from the beginning. But in the last while, they are now known more or less as the world's biggest seed company. They have gone and spent in the last 8-9 years $12 billion buying up seed companies of the world to get total control of the world's seed supply. Now, there's a few other things they have. I won't go into the contracts, but basically what they do is that they get a farmer to sign a contract. The farmer has to buy the seed from Monsanto each year. He has to pay a license fee of $15 an acre to Monsanto each year. He must buy Monsanto's chemical. He must sign a document that he permits Monsanto's police or investigators come on his land for 3 years after he buys the seed from Monsanto, and they can go into a farmer's granaries. They can get his tax records and do any checking on a farmer that they wish. A farmer basically gives up all his rights to Monsanto. If a farmer commits some violation of that contract, Monsanto can take all of his profit from that crop. They can make the farmer destroy his crop or do whatever they want with the farmer in that regard. So that's a contract that's out in Canada. It's not in some foreign country. Now, so that is, then what else did they do? Instead of these messy contracts that they had, or have, until the present time, they tried to come out with the terminator gene. And maybe a lot of you know about the terminator gene. And Monsanto tried to have it introduced into Canada 4 years ago. And basically a terminator gene put into a seed becomes a plant, and all the seeds from that plant are sterile, and you cannot use it for seed the following year. Or if it, now the worst thing with the terminator gene, it can cross-pollinate into your neighbor's organic crop or your neighbor's conventional crop, and render all those seeds sterile that you cannot use it for the following year. So basically, to me, it's the greatest assault on human life that we've ever seen on the face of this planet, when they try to come out with a gene that destroys the future of life. Because where do you stop with a terminator gene seed? Birds, bees, animals, and ultimately a human being. That's how serious it is, and they wanted to bring out into Canada that terminator gene. I was speaking in Bangkok at that time when they tried to bring it into Canada, and they were trying to bring the terminator gene into Asian countries to try that would force third world farmers to buy their seed each year. This is what Monsanto has been doing or trying to do to get total control of the world seed supply. If the terminator gene is not bad enough, there's a new gene out, and we call it on the farms, or the farmers call it the the cheater gene. And the cheater gene works in conjunction with the terminator gene, and this is how it works. The terminator, the seed is planted. The seed becomes a plant. But the plant will not, with the cheater gene in, the plant will not produce a seed until you spray a chemical on it. Then you spray the chemical on it, the plant will produce the seed, and then the terminator gene kicks in and renders the seed sterile. Those are how they're trying to get total control of the world seed and food supply. That is what it's all about. It was never ever meant for feeding a hungry and starving world or less chemicals. And it also permitted the companies to sell more chemicals than ever before. I don't have to go into the issue of human life, the health issue, but there's a lot of research been done, started in Germany, Russia, especially the School of Science of Japan. And now, for the first time last year, one of the American medical associations finally came out with a research of the dangers of eating GMO food. And I won't go into all the dangers, the tumors, the cancer, and other things. I would say at the present time, the worst food that you can eat with GMOs in is corn. 84% of the corn in the United States is genetic altered. But corn does not only have two genes, they have a toxin. They have, first of all, one gene that's a toxin. The other one is permit the corn to be sprayed with a chemical Roundup and it does not die. So they have those two genes in. So if any insect eats any cell of that plant, whether it's the leaf, the fruit, the stem, or anything, it will die. What happens when you eat it? That toxin builds up in your body. So, and remember this, when you put a toxin or a gene into a seed, whether it's a toxin or a gene that that the plant will not die from that chemical, when the plant grows, it magnifies that toxin. It magnifies the gene that provides the safety of the plant not to die. So Monsanto used to say, again, first time in Europe, that there was no horizontal transfer. In other words, if you ate GMO foods, it would pass through your body. That is totally, totally false. There is horizontal transfer. It will go through your stomach lining, your intestines, into your bloodstream, and into the meat of your body. And so, and build up, that toxin will build up. So if you eat meat from a pig, from a cow or steer, and it has been fed GMO feed, and you eat the flesh of that animal, you're also eating GMO food. So those are some of the things that have happened, or that we now know exactly when you eat GMO food. And that's why we feel it's so important that we should have labeling. And I think it's a drastic violation of human rights when we don't know what we're eating ourselves, we don't know what we're feeding to our children. And we should have that human rights issue addressed. My wife and I took this whole issue, we took to Canada, to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, Switzerland, and Canada has been charged for drastic violations of human rights because of the people not knowing what's in their food. Nothing has been done on it as yet, although we submitted it about 2 or 3 years ago in Geneva. We've tried to do everything possible to bring this to light and to protect the health of our children and our grandchildren. So I think I've spoken long enough. There's so many issues that have arisen, but basically our rights, our freedoms are being taken away, and especially in the area of seeds, plants, and food. I think that we have reached a situation now that we still have time to do something about it. There are 4 major crops that have been genetic altered, but they all have been genetic altered. They're ready to be released. And I think we're at a crossroads. One way will lead to total control of our world seed and food supply, and the other way to good, healthy, without that, good, healthy food for our children and future generations. In the trailer it said 15 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. We now have 6 great-grandchildren. And believe me, we're very, very concerned about the future of our children, because we don't know, once you introduce a GMO, can you ever bring it back out of the environment? And I've discussed this many times with Dr. Sarkozy, and he has said at the present time we don't know if we ever can bring back a new life form once it's introduced into the environment. So I think I have spoke long enough. It was a pleasure for my wife and I to be here with you this evening. But do everything you can to stop the further introduction of any more new GMOs. My wife is 81, I'm 82. We don't know how many good years we have left, but believe me, the years that we got left, we're going to go down fighting for the rights of people always to know what's in their food, and that we always have safe, good, healthy food, and not to destroy our biodiversity, our indigenous and heirloom seeds. Thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking to you this evening. There might be some questions. I don't know if we have time, but I really be glad to hear.
When you said we took it to Geneva, who's the we? Do you have a? Can you hear?
Oh, sorry. Oh. Look at it more.
Yeah, it's coming out this way.
Right.
So it's not
Okay,
going
sorry.
out that
You
way.
can't hear it from there. Sorry.
So when you say we took it to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
To the
Geneva.
No, to the Human Rights Commission.
Oh, thank you.
who is the we, right? That
My
was
wife and myself.
Oh, with the.
Yeah, my wife and I, myself, it was about a 50-page document, but it was more than just the patents on life. There was another issue was also the academic issue. There's so much of our programs at our university now are funded by corporations, and that research is all directed in what the corporation wants, and it's not made available to the public, and that really bothers me. When we have 6 grandchildren in university, what kind of a future are they going to have when they graduate, when they cannot, as research people or scientists, release what they have discovered? And to me, that's a drastic violation of academic freedom. And that was also one of the issues to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva.
Well, I'd also like to thank you, sir, for taking a stand.
You know what, another point I did not make, but there's a whole, some of the documents where they advertise, Monsanto advertises, which I have, to inform on your neighbor, if a farmer informs on his neighbor, if he thinks his neighbor is growing Monsanto's, GMOs, without a license from Monsanto. And so there's a whole, what we call, a whole new culture of fear that has been established on the prairies and the northern plains of the U.S., where they use tactics like that, and even in our case, my wife and I, at one meeting after the meeting in Cape Town in South Africa, we were speaking to the assembly of the government, and coming out of the assembly, we ran into one of Monsanto's representatives from Johannesburg, and he shook his fist, my wife's face and my face, and said, nobody stands up to Monsanto. We're going to get both of you somehow, someday, and we're going to destroy you both. So these are the threats that we live under. Watched, when the men or myself worked in the fields, they watched us all day long. My wife would get phone calls, you better watch it. They're going to get you. Sit in our driveway for hours at a time. And not only us, but hundreds of farmers are in our province and in Western Canada, the United States. Hundreds of farmers they've taken to court and totally financially ruined them. This is what's going on. We thought this never could happen in Canada and the United States, what is happening now, how much power these corporations like Monsanto have. Okay, thanks.
You've already touched a little bit on what I was going to ask about, but I thought I would ask for your comments about the new Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan. It's just been organized, and the first CEO is Roger Beachy, who has done research for Monsanto in the United States. And I'm very concerned about the way that corporations are taking over the University of Saskatchewan, and this is, I think, one of the most blatant examples of how, as you say, research is being compromised so that the public of Saskatchewan cannot have faith anymore in the research that is coming out of the university. But I'd like your comments on it.
Well, I believe that there isn't one university from BC to Ontario or Quebec that is not funded to some degree on research by corporations. And I don't think there's a land-grant college left in the United States that is not funded the same way. Because universities feel that's a new way that they can get money for different research projects, but then it's under the control of the corporations. I'll give you an example how strong that feeling is. I was speaking at Harvard, and after the meetings, the president of Harvard got up and made a statement. He felt it would be good that they would take money from corporations. They could develop then certain programs that would benefit the university. And I said to him, how much autonomy do you want to give up at your university to a corporation? Oh, he said we could control it. And I said to him, do you think a corporation is going to give you $10 million, $15 million, $20 million and not have something for it? They don't work that way. But this is what's happening. And that's why I said I'm so concerned about our future generations, our grandchildren. What kind of academic freedom will they have? But that's what's happening out there.
I just have a question. So what about cannabis and hemp? Is Monsanto going there or not so much? Is it...
Could you just repeat that?
Oh, she was asking about cannabis and hemp.
Oh. I know that I think it is permitted. I know that some is being produced in Saskatchewan and also in Manitoba.
But has Monsanto, I guess, went after hemp and cannabis per se? Like
See, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like we don't hear about that, right?
No.
That's why.
See, they tried to, the most principal crop that they wanted to introduce is wheat, and that was rejected. Now, the United States will not introduce GMO wheat unless Canada does it at the same time. And that's what happened with the other GMO seeds, because they said if they introduced GMO wheat, I mean the United States, if they wouldn't introduce GMO wheat and we would not, they said Canada would have an unfair trade advantage because we could sell wheat that is not GMOs. We've lost, and you know, one thing that really bothers me, they said GMOs will feed a hungry and starving world. Basically, we cannot sell any of our canola to a European country because they do not buy GMOs. But what are we doing a lot with our canola now? We're making biofuel from it. Does that feed a hungry world? That's exactly what's being done.
Hi there. I'm an organic market gardener from the Marysburg area. It's a real pleasure to hear you speak. You've been a legend in our household for a long time. And I guess my question is around the information I've seen on the internet about Monsanto buying up seed companies. We use organic seeds, we use heirloom seeds, and I've heard that they've been buying up even heirloom seed companies. And with all of the lengths that they go to, it's like, how do I begin to vet my suppliers and get seeds that are not in some way somehow supporting these? Do you have any ideas for how to go about that?
I should tell you that there's a lot of organic seed companies are very concerned now that some of their organic seed could be contaminated with a patent on a gene that Monsanto has. And that's not only in Canada and the United States. I was in Ireland not long ago, and some of the seed companies, organic seed companies in Ireland, are very concerned about that. 2 weeks or 10 days ago, I came back from a big seed meeting at Baker Seed Company in Missouri. They also have a big seed company in California. And what has happened, Monsanto's been buying up not only regular conventional seed companies, but they've been buying up organic seed companies. And you go on the West Coast, BC, Oregon, Washington State, Northern California, and there's a lot of types of organic seed no longer available. They're buying up the seed companies and taking them off the market. So if their basically philosophy is if you can beat the opposition, you buy them out. And that's what's happening. And that, like I said, the contamination between cross-pollination between canola, the brassica family, any member of that family, you probably know what I'm talking about. What happens when they get contaminated? The court ruled Monsanto's patent on a gene is valid. I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but it is a loss of our seeds and plants we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, and we're losing them, and losing them fast.
The other thing is that I was at Gardenscape here in Saskatoon earlier this year, and I had asked a panel of horticultural experts, how do I know whether or not I'm actually buying GMO seed? And one in the panel actually laughed at me and said to the rest of the panel, oh, well, isn't it all genetically modified? And the other person on the panel said, well, everything has to be labeled for seeds.
Yeah.
So they said if it's not labeled as genetically modified, it's not. And then another person on the panel said, it costs so much money to do genetically modified stuff, most people aren't going to spend that money, and most of the time it won't be genetically modified. And that was the response I got from our horticultural experts in the province. So I just feel like I'm at a loss to figure out how not to support them, you know?
Well, I think why GMOs were not successful in Europe, the European Union, is the fact that they had labeling. And they want to know what's in their food, and they will not eat food with GMOs in it, and that stopped the introduction of GMOs. And in fact, Poland, the president of Poland just recently vetoed a bill that had come before his government on GMOs, and he vetoed. And that was on corn, MOA-10 corn. And so, you know, if they can label, why can't we label? United States and Canada, one of the two first nations of the world that does not have labeling. And if, you know, if it was so great, they should be out on a flagpole and brag about what it all will do. Why do they say it's substantially equivalent, and yet they want to hide it, that you don't know what you're eating. So maybe.
Okay. Oh, well, we'll have one more question then.
Hello. I'm interested about pharmaceutical corporations joining up with the biotechnology corporations. Perhaps you're a little bit familiar with these two types of corporations combining to produce pharmaceutical drugs in food crops like corn and other types of stuff, which I think is absolutely incredibly stupid. Like, I believe they have like a 5-meter distance to prevent contamination from a pharmaceutical drug producing corn crop from a normal crop. And these are like blood thinners, blood thickeners, and all sorts of things you can imagine. And it just goes to show you the moral bankruptcy of these corporations when they'll put people's health at risk by producing stuff like this. And I'm just wondering if you're familiar with where that is now in the status, and because they really don't make news announcements about that kind of stuff too much, but it is putting people's health at risk. Not only the increased exposure to the pesticides and herbicide residue, but also possibility of pharmaceutical drugs that people don't want or don't need. Thank you.
I never touched too much on that subject, but I will now. It's unbelievable what has happened when the Monsanto and the other companies were allowed to prescription type drugs, and it was done not in enclosed facilities. It's done in the open, as we say. And there are a doctor in Oregon has done a lot of research on it. 6 major drugs. There could be more as I speak, that are being produced in the open or in the wild. It's primarily from corn, or it's a type of popcorn that they use for that. If I can remember from memory, I do have the notes on it. It's the prescription drugs is industrial enzymes, blood thinners, blood thickers, and contraceptive drugs. Louise, can you think of any more? Anyway, these are being done in the open. And the doctor in Oregon gave me an example of this last time I met with him. He said if a person has had surgery and you come home and then you eat a food with a blood thinner in, what will the results be? other example I give, if a woman is pregnant and then she eats a food with a contraceptive drug, and what results be. But we have that now in the open. That's why it's so important to know what's in your food. And this has been released in the environment and no control on it. And like I said, I don't know how many other prescription drugs are being produced by plants now. So I think with that again, thank you very much for listening to me, and it's a really pleasure to come back to Saskatoon. I did speak a couple of times at the University of Saskatchewan here, and also the University in Regina. So again, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
On behalf of the Green Party EDA and March Against Monsanto, we would like to present Percy with a token of our appreciation to cover his expenses and the time he has spent sharing his story with us.
Thank you, Percy. Drive safely on your way back home. Forward drive. As financial agent, that's one of the benefits I get, is to be able to write some checks once in a while and reward good people for good work. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. We're going to be, well, let Darren, the MC, explain what happens next. Thank you, Darren.
We'll keep it short. We are going to screen the film The World According to Monsanto. We may trim it slightly from the beginning. But I'd like to say a few words about corporatization. When we have corporate-sponsored governments, it's no surprise that they end up promoting policies and ideas that the corporations themselves want to have happen. For example, a poll was done and it showed that 90% of the people would like to have their food labeled. And right now in Connecticut, the Senate approved in concept the idea that GMO food should be labeled by 35-1. So that would seem like a victory. But this bill has to go before the House of Representatives, where it will probably wither and die like a weed sprayed with Roundup. And that begs the question, so who is this House of Representatives representing? It seems that, it seems that a lot of corporations have a greater say over what we eat, what we drink, and what jobs we take. A lot of people are afraid to actually speak out or come to events like this because it can really hurt your career choices. You know, speaking out against Monsanto or any large corporation has repercussions. And some of them can be quite large, as Percy has experienced personally. So the idea that Monsanto can own a life form is really bizarre. Corn was developed in South America by indigenous people, by a relationship with what they call Mother Earth, or Pachamama. To them, seeds are the sacred creation, a pact between creation and humanity, a gift from the universe to us, and that no one person, no one entity can own life. Their culture is very different. In the story of corn, you know, a chikaruna, one who could walk between the worlds, one who could speak with plants, walked out and saw this little grass growing and had a conversation with this plant. And determined that one day, in hundreds of years, this plant would feed the world as they knew it. And their work over hundreds of years rivals anything that Monsanto or genetically modified organisms have done. They took a little piece, a little grass plant, and they changed the sexual orientation of the parts, and it grew into this giant plant. So if anyone has a claim to ownership, it would be them. But they do not believe that you can own creation, that you can work with it to make your lives better and more enjoyable. But that the idea of owning life is completely out of context. We are part of life, and what harms one harms us all. So I would like to suggest a radical idea that if you don't want corporate-sponsored governments, support a party that isn't sponsored by a corporation. And that would be the Green Party. I don't think it would be such a terrible thing if there was a representative from every province. Elizabeth May has done well, and there's another one in BC now. I think the Green Party can be a conscious agent of change. Someone who can speak without fear of repercussions from their corporate sponsors or other entities. So I want to thank you all for coming and celebrating this. And if you want to stick around for the film, please do. Thank you so much.